So if individuals exercise 2.5 hours a week at a moderate intensity or 75 minutes a week at vigorous intensity, they can qualify for my study. In addition to, they have to have used cannabis at least once in the past 6 months and be a current U.S. resident.
What are you talking about?
Smoking in a bong or a blunt.
Grass. Dank. Reefer.
Was his job it just means like that's the fucking joint.
Ganja.
Hash.
Fucking awesome.
Hello and welcome back to Exploring Cannabis and Exercise. This week I'm excited to highlight PhD candidate Kirsten Thornhill, who is doing her dissertation on cannabis and exercise. She'll talk about the study she's conducting. It's a two-parter. You can participate in a survey aspect of the study, and then she also has a follow-up aspect where she's interviewing people afterwards, so it's super interesting. You'll hear why she's conducting this research and why it's important. And if you qualify and want to participate in this study, check out the link in the episode description and on Instagram. Have a good one. All right, Kirsten, thank you so much for being here to tell us about your study. So tell us a little bit about the background of your study and what's it called.
Hi, happy to. I am doing a mixed method study where I will be exploring the perceptions and experiences of cannabis use for exercise performance and recovery in active adults.
All right, so how did you get into this type of research?
So through my education and research history, I've primarily worked with athletes ranging from collegiate, professional, recreational, Olympic. So I'm a very much quantitative physiological researcher by trade. And often we saw athletes primarily for recovery and for performance. And oftentimes they're using different modalities to quote unquote enhance their recovery or to quote unquote supplement their performance. So that kind of led me into the area of cannabis.
Awesome. And so how did you come up with this design right here that you're working on right now?
So I started working in the cannabis industry kind of as a CBD educator, research and development writer in 2018, just as a side job. I was kind of approached and was like, hey, you like to read research, right? And I was like, yes. And you want to write about it? And I said, yes. And so that passion was kind of seated within me during that time. And fast forward 5 years later, I worked with numerous CBD and cannabis companies, whether they were startups or established companies. And I really got immersed in reading and writing about CBD and cannabis research. Fast forward to starting my PhD in 2020, I started to tie together my human and sport performance background with athletes, with cannabis use. And then all of the questions I just really started writing down, and here we are.
Awesome. All right, so tell us more about who you're trying to recruit for your study and what's expected of them.
So I am recruiting active adults. That term is really broad, but I'm defining that according to American College of Sports Medicine's exercise guidelines. So if individuals exercise 2.5 hours a week at a moderate intensity or 75 minutes a week at vigorous intensity, they can qualify for my study. In addition to, they have to have used cannabis at least once in the past 6 months and be a current U.S. resident.
So how did you decide one time in the last 6 months for cannabis use?
That was a tricky one. Since the cannabis and exercise literature is so new, I really took a collaborative approach of what has the previous literature in the last few years said, and how can I kind of grasp a very, very recent use of cannabis with a very recent use of exercise. And so it really came to that from collecting from the body of literature.
Got it. So it can be people who are obviously physically active and then use cannabis either like recreationally or like as recovery or before, it doesn't matter, just any kind of cannabis use?
Yes. So I know that is very, very broad. And when I was hypothetically throwing the spaghetti on the wall, I kept just going down rabbit holes. And really, with this being such a new pioneering type of avenue for research, I was like, okay, I need to start somewhere. Even if this is broad, I can build off of this type of research and continue to get more specific with how recently they used cannabis or what types of activities they're doing. So within the last 6 months, felt like a reasonable ask for the survey portion of my mixed method study. And then in my interviews, I'm asking more specific details about how frequency of the use, how recently, what has it been like?
Cool. So, yeah, let's go through that mixed methods designs, and I'll have a link to the first part of the study in the show notes, and I'm gonna have a link tree as well, so people can click on the link. But yeah, so they're gonna be directed to a Qualtrics survey, and how long does that survey generally take, and what kind of questions are gonna be asked on that?
Sure. So my survey is completely anonymous. I will not be collecting your name or any identifiable information. That survey takes anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes on average. And the types of questions that respondents can expect to see are when do you use cannabis in relation to exercise, before, during, and after? What types of cannabis are you using? What's your dosage, if you do know? What types of exercise do you do? How often are you doing those activities? As well as questions about cannabis in relation to your performance and cannabis in relation to your recovery.
Got it. What's the second part of the study?
The second part, if participants qualify, they complete the survey, they're provided the opportunity to sign up on a Google form if they're interested in interviewing with me. The interview portion is 30 minutes or less, about 25 to 30, virtually via Zoom, and that is completely confidential. So anything shared in those interviews will also have their information be de-identified. And in those interviews, I'm asking more specific questions about performance, about recovery, about cannabis in relation to this. How do people feel when they take it, before, during, and after? What does performance and recovery mean to them?
Cool. Who's like your target population? Like what do you hope to your audience to get from this research that you're doing?
Ultimately, I wanted to use the general population, or our active adults. Maybe that's not even our gen pop. The purpose of that is really, this research is going to be foundational for where I want to continue to grow within the cannabis and exercise field. I would have research to be like, okay, active adults use it this way, then we can build upon this, hopefully with my research portfolio, and work with recreational athletes, professional, etc. So starting really at this basis of who is an active adult is really who I'm going for.
Cool. Awesome. All right, perfect. Anything else you want to say about your study?
I am very, very excited to interact with individuals all over the country. Again, my survey is completely anonymous, takes about 8 to 10 minutes. And if you are interested in an interview, I encourage you to fill out that Google form. And I will be providing a $20 Amazon incentive for completing the interview with me.
Awesome. And how many people are you trying to recruit in general?
For my survey, about 400. And for my interviews, I am selecting 30 adults through a stratification method of high users and low users.
Oh, cool. Tell me more about that.
So I will be stratifying based on Dr. Lozano's previous survey developed on physical activity and exercise, where he stratified individuals as being a low user 1 to 3 times a month, and a high user being 1 to 7 days a week.
Yeah. Wow. And so what are you expecting to find?
I think innately, especially just with a mixed methods approach, there may be innate bias that individuals who consume cannabis may be more inclined to select my study. More specifically, individuals who use high amounts of cannabis or have a high frequency of cannabis, they may be more inclined to participate in my interviews. So that's also why I'm wanting to include these low users, so that I am really grasping equal parts of who's using it a lot, who's not using it a lot, and seeing that commonality of how that's involved with their performance and recovery.
Cool. Yeah, because there's such a huge variety of people who are out there, and there's definitely the people who are like, I use it every single day. Like, this is like part of my whole exercise routine is cannabis. And then there's other people who are like, yeah, I use cannabis, but like it's not at all related to my exercise. And so I think it's really great to have a study that encapsulates all types of people in this group. And so yeah, I'm really excited to see the results of this, and encourage everyone to start the survey and complete the survey. But yeah, I'm really excited to see the results of this. I think this is a really awesome foundational kind of research that we need, and we need to do more of this kind of stuff. I'm also like really particularly excited about, but with I think that my research, there's Johnny Lozano's research, and then Angela Bryan taking that survey stuff, and it's like survey work can be really good and foundational, but then I really like that you're adding in this qualitative, like this the interview aspect of it. So how did you get into the interview aspect of it?
So, as you mentioned, there are previous doctors that have developed surveys, including yourself. And I think that's exactly, the first steps we need to go towards that, right? We know they're using it. We kind of maybe know how they're using it. We need to fill in that gap of why, or get foundational understanding of what are these responses from these individuals. So I was able to create a survey based off of this previous work, including Dr. Lozano's survey, and I was able to do a content validity index from different cannabis and exercise experts in the field to validate my survey. And that was extra effort and an extra step, but I felt like that was really, really important because it is so early on in this cannabis and exercise literature to have those inclusions from these foundational PIs that have been doing these studies in the last, 2-3 years?
Yeah.
So I had that aspect there. And my committee really challenged me to say, well, what makes your survey different if you're basing it off of Dr. Lozano's work? And I was like, we should do a qualitative portion. And they go, you want to do a mixed methods? And I said, yes, there's only really a couple qualitative studies that have asked people about their cannabis use. One was in chronic pain patients, and one was just in college students. And so I said, okay, well, there's some rationale there that I could include, but I think I need to do a qualitative approach because, like I said, we know athletes, adults, different populations are using, but we don't have their inclusions of how and why from their words. I am somewhat limited being in Utah. I'm not able to provide recreational cannabis for like a physiological study here. And so this is the closest I can get to capturing what actual people are using across the country, and then communicating that in a quantitative and qualitative type of study to tell people this is statistically what individuals are using based on my survey and how they're using it. And then qualitatively, this is how people are communicating what they're using it for and how it's making them feel.
Yeah, I think that's so awesome because just from my experience of doing survey, like my limited experience of doing survey work, there's certain questions that as you're creating a survey, it's like, oh yeah, this is like such a good question. And then when you actually analyze it later, you're like, this doesn't actually quite get at what I really care about. And in the time that I have done like a survey and then having a box at the end that's just like any other comments, that was just so much more interesting data because there are certain questions that I didn't even think to ask that are captured in these qualitative, like once you start talking to someone, it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about asking that, but like it totally summarizes like the data in a really cool way. And so I'm really excited for that aspect of it. And then there was something else that you said about, I mean, obviously in Utah, cannabis is a little bit different in Utah versus California. So how did your university feel about this research?
So the great thing is I was very frequently in communication with our institutional review board way prior to me arriving at this dissertation phase, because I knew this would be my baby. And, I just asked questions about, criminalization precautions, vulnerable populations. I really went into the research ethics with IRB and was like, how can I ensure, even though I'm doing, a survey anonymous and I'm doing a virtual interview, so I won't be interacting with people in person or administering anything, how can I ensure my jargon is non-biased? How can I ensure there is no asking of medicinal or recreational use? And so I really proactively worked with them to see, what are their questions, what are their concerns before I got to the IRB application process.
Cool. And has your committee been supportive, or how did you find your committee members for it?
Yeah, so my committee is comprised of different individuals that have been with me through my academic career, and they primarily have quantitative physiological human performance backgrounds and exercise psychology. And so when I was bringing them together, the nice thing is it naturally happened. And I think the great commonality is them seeing my passion for this, even though they don't have the background in cannabis. So part of that I've heavily relied on, I call them my cannabis council, the individuals that are currently working with cannabis, currently working with athletic populations. So I've kind of developed my own community, and the questions that my committee may be like, we don't have experience in cannabis or with dosing or what types of questions to ask. So I've relied a lot on my external network for somewhat of these random questions, or, how should I ask this? And that's really been clutch.
Awesome. Yes, I know. I love, it's been awesome connecting with other cannabis and exercise researchers from all over the world. And yeah, we're all here for each other. Super happy to get the word out about your study. Looking forward to seeing the results of it, and anything else we can do to help. I am here for it. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more, you can follow me on Instagram at Exploring Cannabis and Exercise, or at Dr. Ogle, or you can visit my website at whitneyogle.com. If you want to support this podcast, you can sign up for Patreon at patreon.com/Exploring Cannabis and Exercise. This podcast was produced by Haley Montowski, and the music used on this podcast is called Bonfire Cauliflower, created by Isaac Joel. Make good choices out there.